read or at least contact with Tim Redmond through his readings, his articles, but you know, he's been a political and investigative reporter in San Francisco for more than 30 years. And I, for one, I've only been here for 13 years, and I always go to Tim Redmond's pages to try to get the back history on some of these issues that come up in San Francisco. He's the founder of, you know, 48 Hills, which I'm sure is the go-to for most of us in the progressive group here. Take it away, Tim.
Thank you so much, Zoe, and I'm really, really happy to be here. Just for the record, since we're being recorded, I am the editor of 48 Hills. I'm also the editor of the San Francisco Bay Guardian, which still exists online. I'm speaking tonight. My opinions are purely my own. I'm not speaking on behalf of 48 Hills, which of course does not endorse candidates or make recommendations on elections, but I will speak freely on behalf of myself as somebody who's been involved. Actually, it's getting closer to 40 years now that I've been an investigative reporter and political reporter in San Francisco. And what little hair I have left is getting grayer and grayer as time goes on. So let me talk a little bit about what the recall was supposed to be. Let me talk a little bit, then I'll talk a little bit about why this Gavin Newsom recall is on the ballot. And then I want to talk a little bit about the recall efforts in San Francisco and what they mean and where they came from. Okay, so Hiram Johnson was governor of California in the what's called the progressive era, the 1920s. When Hiram Johnson became governor of California, the state was run by Southern Pacific. Right? Southern Pacific Railroad basically decided who was going to be governor until he was elected, decided who was going to be mayor of San Francisco. Very importantly, at that time, decided who was going to be district attorney of San Francisco because Southern Pacific was based here and they wanted to be sure that nobody prosecuted them for anything. They ran the state, and they ran the state because they controlled commerce. And they had all the money, and it was the state legislature, the governor's office, Sacramento, San Francisco were notoriously corrupt with SP money. So part of the progressive era reforms were the referendum, the initiative, and the recall. The idea of the initiative was if the legislature is too corrupt to put a measure on the ballot that the people want, the people can do it themselves. Right? The referendum is if the legislature is so corrupt, they pass a law that's just going to benefit Southern Pacific Corporation, the people have the right to say no. The recall was aimed at basically politicians who were controlled by Southern Pacific and by other corporate interests, politicians who were so corrupt that you couldn't trust them to do the people's business. And at that point in California history, there were a lot of them, right? Although the recall wasn't used a lot in those days, but that's what it was supposed to be, okay? Now, the last time we had a gubernatorial recall in California, Gray Davis was governor. Many of you remember this, and it was in the middle of the energy crisis. It was in the middle of a period where Enron was stealing $40 billion from California. The legislature and the governor, with the support of Gray Davis, had made a massive, massive mistake in deregulating the electric market, allowing the likes of Enron to come in and make tons of money, but also basically crashing the grid. So those of you who were here then remember there were rolling blackouts. Where I was working at the Guardian would be on production day, all the machines would be working and all of a sudden, bang, the power's out. And of course, they wouldn't tell you when there was gonna be a blackout because PG&E said, we don't want the criminals to know when the power's gonna be off so they can break into places. So it was wild, it was completely random. People were furious, and Gray Davis completely failed to do anything about this, right? That recall was a bad idea because Gray Davis, someone could have run against him very shortly afterwards, right? But nevertheless, you could see why people were upset. There was a legitimate reason to be upset. The problem was the way the recall works in California is you got two questions. Should I throw this bum out? And number two, who should I replace this person with? And what we wound up with was Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was a big name movie star, who ran as an alternative to Gavin Newsom. And because he had massive name recognition, frankly, was trying to be a little bit of a centrist moderate Republican when he was running. Gray Davis was thrown out of office and we got Arnold Schwarzenegger. That is the last time we have had a Republican governor of California for obvious reasons. Right? There's not that many Republicans in California compared to Democrats, and there's no way the Republicans are going to win a statewide election for almost anything right now in California today. So Gavin Newsom, duly elected governor. I will say again for the record, I am not a Gavin Newsom fan. The Bay Guardian has never supported Gavin Newsom for anything, not for supervisor, not for mayor, only reluctantly for governor, but certainly not for governor in any primary, right? Because, I mean, obviously there was no choice for him running as a Democrat, but at the Bay Guardian, we've never been Gavin Newsom fans. But let me say that Gavin Newsom's, the political disagreements I have with Gavin Newsom, and they are very real, don't amount to the level, first of all, even amount to the level of Gray Davis, who shouldn't have been recalled. They certainly don't amount to the level that Hiram Johnson had in mind when he was talking about the recall. The idea is not to recall somebody because you disagree with their politics, or in the case of the Republican Party, you want to do over. We lost that one. Let's try again in a tricky way to get a Republican into the governor's office, right? He's done some dumb stuff. Yes, he went to dinner at the French Laundry. Bad enough, no masks during the pandemic. Worse, he went to dinner at the French Laundry with a bunch of high-powered corporate lobbyists who represented a lot of the same interests that he ought to be fighting against, all right? He ran for office. I heard him promise the California Nurses Association, I am going to bring single-payer healthcare to California. And that is why thousands and thousands of CNA nurses walked precincts and pushed for Gavin Newsom. I warned at the time that he had no intention of doing that. I never believed him. He hasn't. In fact, the minute he got elected, he dropped that completely from the agenda. Has anyone heard Gavin Newsom talk about single-payer healthcare? No, in fact, when the pandemic hit, Newsom got caught off guard in part because Jerry Brown had systematically dismantled the public health system in California in the name of austerity, and Newsom hadn't done anything about it, anything about restoring public health when he was governor. So he was kind of caught by this. Now, you can't blame the governor of California for a global pandemic. And you can't blame the governor of California for making some mistakes in the global pandemic. He turned over the COVID vaccine program in a no-bid contract to a single private entity. Look, I wouldn't have done that. The public health system was in disarray. You can't blame him for the fact that he lived through a global pandemic, right? If Gavin Newsom is recalled, and looking at the polls right now, it's possible. This is no joke, right? It was not possible that he was going to lose the governor's race, the election. It is possible he could lose the recall. And if he does, I would argue it will be because he lost the left, because he doesn't have the enthusiasm to drive the kind of voter turnout that he needs. The Republicans are thrilled by this. The right-wing Republicans who don't want mask mandates, some of them don't believe in vaccines. Right? They've never liked Gavin Newsom because he's a Democrat. These are, in many cases, the people behind this are Trumpians, right? They are thrilled. They're all going to turn out. They can't win fair and square. They cannot win an election in California fair and square. So they're going to find a way to get some right-wing person in through this trickery. Right? They're thrilled. They're all going to turn out. The question is, will we? All right. I already cast my ballot. Whatever you vote, I hope all of you vote in this. But I know it's tough. I have talked to many, many friends who've said, why should I go out of my way to support Gavin Newsom? What has he done for progressives? Look, the state is on fire. A lot of that is the fault of PG&E. Has Gavin Newsom made any moves to break up PG&E and turn it over to public power entities and put it under government control? No. If anything, he's talking about bailing out PG&E. So it stays as a private. This is where he was in San Francisco. I understand that. And this is his fundamental problem. One fundamental problem. He hasn't kept the enthusiasm of the voters who need to turn out. This is not going to be about, this entire election is about turnout. All right. If we had the turnout that we had when he was elected, this would be easy. But the Republican turnout right now looks like it's going to be higher percentage-wise. And 80% of If Republicans make up 26% of the state, but 80 or 90% of them turn out, and Democrats make up, Jim will correct me on this, but whatever it is, 53 or 56% of the state, and only half of them turn out, wait a minute, the math isn't looking good, right? Second mistake Gavin made is his initial arrogance. This has been a problem for Gavin Newsom for a long time. He didn't think this was real when it first happened. He didn't think this could actually happen. He thought this was a small band of disaffected crazies, and they were never going to get the extraordinary number of signatures that it takes to put a recall on the statewide ballot. He was wrong. He completely misjudged the political mood in California and the anger at him from the hardcore right, but the disenchantment and dissatisfaction from the progressives. So he didn't move quickly enough. He didn't do anything to make the progressives believe that they should support him. And now, and Jim can talk more about this because he's the strategist here, now they're scrambling to do turnout. I mean, I got a text message a week ago saying, Tim, I hope you're going to vote in the recall election and oppose the recall. I should have gotten that a month ago, right? I have my son and my daughter are both registered voters in the state of California. Neither one of them has gotten a single message from the Newsom campaign. No one has reached out. My daughter is 18, my son is 22. Right? That's the demographic you got to get to. And no one's reaching out to them. Right? And they're the ones who are saying, not them specifically, because they're very politically sophisticated, having been forced to listen to me all their lives. But it's their friends who are saying, what has Gavin done for me? Why do I care? Okay? So that's the danger of this recall. And that is why, it is critically important that people vote. Now, the other thing that Gavin Newsom did that was purely a matter of strategy is he made sure that there was no alternative Democrat on the ballot. Right? When Gray Davis was running, Cruz Bustamante, who was the lieutenant governor, put his name on the ballot with the line, vote no on the recall, vote yes on Bustamante, with the idea that if people did vote for the recall, there'd be a Democratic alternative. That completely failed. And in retrospect, a lot of people say, well, Bustamante made it sound like you can vote yes on the recall and then vote for him. Right? And that was a complete failure. This time around, they said, no, there's not going to be anyone on the ballot. We're going to scare away any potential Democrat who might be seen as an alternative to Gavin Newsom. So the only alternative is vote no or get a far right, almost loony right Republican, which is what we're faced with right now. There was a moment when Jane Fonda actually thought about putting her name on the ballot. She has the star power of Arnold Schwarzenegger. She is a longtime progressive Democrat. She might have been able to beat out all of these Republicans. There's so many of them, right? She might have been able to come in first if the recall worked. She decided not to. Maybe she was talked out of it. I don't know. But remember, this is not a majority vote. This is a plurality vote. If Gavin Newsom gets recalled, the person who gets the most votes out of what, 50 candidates, right? The person who gets the most votes, who may end up getting 20% of the statewide vote, becomes governor of California. Now, again, I'm not a huge fan of Gavin Newsom. I would love to see a progressive Democrat run against him in 18 months. It's not that long before he's up on the ballot again. Right? This guy's got to run for re-election. Meanwhile, we're going to spend $200 and something million on this recall election. Right? Now, how am I doing on time, Joey? I have another 5 minutes. I don't want to take more time than I have.
You have 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes so far.
Oh, okay, I have 10 minutes. Okay. Well, let me talk about how this is filtered down to San Francisco. Okay. We also have recalls going on in San Francisco. This whole recall thing, this whole recall furor, really does seem to me like it's a do-over sour grapes kind of thing. People on the school board and the district attorney get elected every 4 years. If they're doing something truly horrible, yeah, the recall is there. But if you disagree with their policies, and that's what's going on here, people are fundamentally disagreeing with policies, and I'm going to come back to where this comes from in a minute. The recall, the thing to do is to run against them. I mean, if you don't like what Chesa Boudin is doing, in 2.5 years, he'll be on the ballot. Run against him and bring up his record and say, I don't think he did the job. Meantime, what Chesa Boudin has done is follow his campaign promises. He's done what he promised to do. He's done what he's promised to do, operating, again, in the middle of a global pandemic. Now, a couple of frustrating things for me about this particular recall. And one is the news media coverage. Right? When you actually look at the data, you actually look at what's going on. This whole idea that San Francisco is unsafe, that there's a crime wave, that people can't walk the streets safely, that there's, an increase in violence is untrue. Is untrue. Crime is not up in San Francisco in most categories, right? Then there's this whole thing that Chesa Boudin is not prosecuting criminals. Actually, prosecutions, when you actually look at the data, prosecutions for serious crimes are comparable to all the other DAs in the Bay Area. They're all down a bit. Why? Because there's no courtrooms. Okay, because we're in a global pandemic. And for most of the past year, most of the courts were closed. You can't put someone on trial if you can't put a jury in a courtroom. And that is what has been happening. Now, there are a limited number of criminal courtrooms in San Francisco, a small number, right? A handful. And Boudin is using those to prosecute serious crimes. We now have prosecutions of homicide, armed robbery, sexual assault going on in courtrooms in San Francisco, right? I know this because I was called for jury duty and about a month ago, and they told me it was going to be a 6 to 8 week trial. And I didn't get chosen. But when you see a 6 to 8 week trial, that's not shoplifting, right? That's not someone going into Walgreens and stealing some stuff. That's homicide, right? Or that is a horrible assault, armed robbery, rape case, right? That's what's going on. And that's what's being prosecuted right now. And they are, in fact, prosecutions for sexual assault, for rape cases in San Francisco are up under Chesa Boudin, which is good because under his predecessor, the record of prosecuting sexual assaults was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. So actually, but when you see, I don't know how many of you read the Sunday Chronicle story about Boudin, where it says crime debate focuses on Boudin. The first 4 paragraphs are this horrible story about the older Asian man who was assaulted by somebody who should have been behind bars, right? And this is the beginning of a story about Chesa Boudin and crime. We keep hearing these anecdotes over and over and over again, as if that's relevant. Chesa Boudin is not the one who let this guy out of jail. Chesa Boudin wanted this person incarcerated. A judge let him out of jail for different reasons, right? This wasn't Chesa Boudin. All of these stories that we're hearing about all these horrible crimes, they're not because Chesa Boudin didn't file charges, and it's not because he's letting people out of jail. It's number one, judges in San Francisco are appropriately trying to avoid holding people who are poor just because they can't afford cash bail. Number two, there's an algorithm that judges use to decide who can be released from jail, right? That's the algorithm they follow. That's not up to the DA. Third, we have been trying as a city very hard to keep people out of prison, out of county jail during the pandemic, because that is a confined place that is about as hard to prevent COVID as any place you could possibly get. Talk about a congregate setting. You're in jail. Right? So all those factors are going on, which do not have anything to do with Chesa Boudin letting criminals out of jail. Nevertheless, this media narrative has somehow emerged, and the mainstream media have allowed it to go forward. All right. The other interesting thing that has not been discussed anywhere near as much as it should be, that it ought to be front page news in the Chronicle and ought to be on the front edge, that TV stations ought to be paying more attention to this than they do to these false stories about Chesa Boudin, right? This is Republican money. The Boudin recall is Republican money. It's hard to find because these folks are very good at hiding their trails. You have to go through, this is what they do. They set up a committee with a friendly name like Neighbors for a Better San Francisco, right? They file that as a PAC in Sacramento, right? Then they funnel money from that to Citizens for Justice in San Francisco, which funnels money to another committee, which funnels money to another committee. And by the time you get to the mailers, it's kind of hard to figure out who actually paid for this. But when you track the money back, here's what's happened. Neighbors for a Better San Francisco was formed to last year and a half ago, to prevent progressives from winning the Board of Supervisors. That was money to attack Dean Preston, right? To attack Gordon Marr, right? To make sure, to try to stop, to attack Connie Chan. That's what that money was for. And they raised money from a lot of wealthy local donors, including the biggest one was William Oberndorf. William Oberndorf was the biggest funder for that particular committee. William Oberndorf gave $1 million to Mitch McConnell to keep him in control of the Senate. He's a Republican. He's a supporter of it. So, but he gives all this money. Okay, he's a real estate guy in San Francisco. Maybe he doesn't want to see Dean Preston, Connie Chan, Gordon Marr, these folks get elected and be able to pass stricter rules on rent control or tax big real estate, whatever it is. Maybe he wants to, he doesn't want to, okay. But the $3 million that they put into that committee was a spectacular failure. They lost every single race they competed in. Right? The progressives won the Board of Supervisors. But in the end, after that election was over, there was still $300,000 left in this account. They didn't spend all of Bill's money. Right? There's 300. So that $300,000, which was earmarked to defeat progressive supervisors, suddenly winds up in a committee to recall Chesa Boudin. Right? Then they start raising more money. All right. They have raised money from the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. They have raised money from the Fisher family. There's a guy named Daniel O'Keefe, who's a real estate investor in Chicago. Why would a real estate investor in Chicago care who's the district attorney in San Francisco? I don't know, but he put up $100,000 to recall Chesa Boudin. He's also put up big money to support Republican candidates, right? There's a guy named Paul Spott, who's a Republican, who's put up $50,000 to recall Chesa Boudin. Dee Dee Wilsey put up $50,000 to recall Chesa Boudin. She had a fundraiser for Donald Trump at her mansion in Pacific Heights, all right? All of these committees and all of this work is being coordinated by Mary Jung, who was a lobbyist for the real estate industry, who was a big supporter of Susie Loftus for DA. Her candidate lost. Okay, fair enough if the real estate industry or individuals affiliated with it wanted to support Susie Loftus for DA. Right? That's a perfectly fair thing to do. She lost. The voters disagreed. You know what? If she thinks Chesa Boudin is doing a terrible job, she can run against him in 2.5 years and start raising money from all these people. But you know what? You can't get $100,000 from Bill Oberndorf to run Susie Loftus for DA because they're only allowed to give $500. But you can get that money to recall the current DA. And then, by the way, let's think about this for a second. If you recall the governor of California, all right, let's just move to New York for a second, right? The governor of New York resigned. If he hadn't been resigned, he probably would have been impeached. And if they had the recall in New York, he probably would have been recalled. And you can make an argument for that. You can certainly make an argument that what Andrew Cuomo did rose to the level of being recalled from office. Right? But because of the way it works in New York, the lieutenant governor is now governor. If Gavin Newsom is recalled, the lieutenant governor doesn't become governor. It's whoever comes in first from this range of Republicans. Now, suppose Chesa Boudin is recalled as DA. What happens? The mayor appoints his replacement. The mayor of San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
And I have serious problems with this. The mayor of San Francisco can fill a vacancy in any elective office in the city. Board of Supervisors, the school board, we'll come to that, the community college board, the DA, the city attorney. If the office is vacant, the mayor fills. So the person who becomes DA, if Chesa Boudin is recalled, is whoever the mayor wants. Anyone guess who the mayor might appoint as district attorney? I'm guessing Susie Loftus, who she supported for that job and who the voters rejected. All right, but now we can put her, now the mayor could put her in office if Chesa Boudin is recalled. Right? The mayor, by the way, has taken no position on the recall. Has not said that she is against it. Phil Ting is against the recall of Chesa Boudin. Scott Wiener said he will not support the recall, but he hasn't said that he was it. David Chu is ducking the question, right? So all these people who are, oh my God, there's no grounds to recall the governor, are not saying the same thing about the district attorney in San Francisco. Okay, now let me move on very quickly because I'm almost out of time to the school board recall. Okay, I get the anger that the school board couldn't get the schools open last year. My kids are out of public schools. They've all gone off to college. They've both gone off to college. I would be beside myself if I couldn't figure out, if my kids were home and couldn't go to public school, right? I wouldn't know what to do with them. I understand the frustration, particularly for younger kids. I also understand that the teachers union in San Francisco has a contract with the district, and you cannot impose new work rules, particularly new safety work rules, on a labor organization with a contract without negotiating. And the teachers union negotiated with the district for a long time before they came up with protocols that would work. And that's because the disease kept changing. We didn't know what would work, right? Private schools were able to open. Number one, their teachers aren't unionized. Take the risk of dying from COVID or quit your job, right? Number two, they've got big modern facilities and lots of space. I don't know how many of you have been in the San Francisco public school recently, but they are poorly ventilated. They are crowded. The buildings are old, right? Working out protocols that would be safe takes time, right? So that's one of the things. The other thing is, all right, I know there's a lot of anger at Allison Collins. I'm not going to get into that. She did a really dumb thing. But there is deep-seated anger in San Francisco from parents who did not want to see in any way Lowell High School change its admissions policy. They wanted Lowell High School to be a merit-based admissions policy, which has become an admissions policy that largely excludes Black people and significantly excludes Latino people. There are very few Black students at Lowell, right? First of all, they couldn't do a test-based admissions policy this year because they couldn't put everyone together in a great big room for the test, right? My daughter took the Lowell test when she was looking at high schools. They're all together in a great big gym, like sitting, right next to each other, a couple of feet apart from each other. You can't do that in a pandemic, right? Number two, the school board basically said, you know what? UC Berkeley's given up the SAT. 2,000 colleges, private and public around the country, are stopped using standardized tests basis for admission as a way to diversify their student body. Why shouldn't we do that at Lowell? Right? But that created an outcry that has helped lead to this recall. Last thing I want to say about this and stop and turn it over to Jim is this is the same folks. When you go around the city, there's people with gathering signatures saying, hey, recall the district attorney and recall the school board. All right. And the money that is paying those signature gatherers, who are getting, by the way, up to $8 a signature. And many of whom, by the way, I have talked to many of them. Many of them have no idea who the DA is. They've come from out of town. They've basically been flown or bussed in from other cities to earn $8 an hour trying to recall the DA, and they don't even know his name or who he is or what his policies are, all right? That same funding is funding people to recall the school board members, okay? So I've talked too long already. I'm going to stop there and turn this over to Jim. And I see there's a lot of questions in the chat. We can answer them later.
Thanks, Tim. Oh,
yeah, no, go ahead. I was just going to introduce you.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I just go through life not, with that arrogance of being a white guy.
Well, no, Jim Ross, political consultant, innovative communicator. I'm just reading from your bio, if that's okay. The founder of Telegraph, a full service strategic communication firm. For the most part, I met Jim at the D1 Democratic meeting, and I just thought he had a great grasp of the recall and what was going on in the country and the state, actually, on the number of recalls and the type of money that was coming in and the people that were behind some of these recalls. It just seemed to drill down to that level. And so I was happy that you accepted our invitation. Okay, I'll leave it to you.
Thanks. And thank you very much. And, it's great to be on a kind of a little mini panel here with Tim. I really, really appreciate that. We've been on same side and opposite sides of issues over the years, including he was saying how they've opposed Gavin Newsom for everything he's ever ran for when he was at the Bay Guardian. I ran Gavin Newsom's camp for mayor in 2003. And as somebody who hates Gavin Newsom only like somebody who's worked for him could, I'm telling you, and I'm asking everybody here to do everything you can to oppose the recall. the recall, let's be clear, the recall of the governor now is only on the ballot because a judge gave the folks gathering signatures for it extra time. And, to Tim's point, the arrogance of Gavin Newsom shouldn't have, have an impact on the rest of our lives. And, a Larry Elder as governor of California will have extraordinary impacts, negative impacts on California and the country, from environmental protections to worker protections, just across the board. And get your friends to vote. I'm doing a campaign right now in Santa Barbara County, and it's scary. You drive around these rural areas, every single place has a, recall Gavin Newsom sign up on in their front yard. People have Larry Elder signs up. It's pretty much, the Republicans are motivated and fired up about this, and Democrats aren't. Now, fortunately, there's a lot more of us, but there's a lot of folks that don't even know there's a recall. It's really, believe it or not, really, really scary out there. So everything you could do, please, get people to vote and vote against the recall. To that point, Newsom, and I think it was for his own self-preservation, the right political move to, keep a Democrat off the ballot. It might end up being terrible for the state, but knowing Gavin, that's not the first time he put himself in front of other interests. But that said, it's one of those issues where 18 months from now, hopefully we'll have, hopefully we won't have a recall, but we might be facing, having to take out a sitting Republican governor, which is defeating an incumbent's, the toughest thing you do in politics. So, we don't want to have to face that again, where you have, a situation where we get Arnold Schwarzenegger, a candidate like, a governor like Arnold Schwarzenegger for 2 terms. And let's just say the leading candidate right now, Larry Elder, makes Arnold Schwarzenegger look moderate and competent, so it's really a scary time. This is really high stakes, and it's high stakes driven by ego. So hopefully hopefully we can find somebody to the left to challenge Gavin Newsom in November or in June of next year. But I really, since Tim did a great job kind of giving an outline on the state recall, I wanted to kind of focus a little bit more on the local recall. Particularly the Chesa Boudin and the school board recall. But one other thing I just want to put a pin in is recalls are happening. There's one in Sonoma, and and it's driven for many of the same reasons. They're trying to recall the DA up in Sonoma right now. What you're seeing is there is a group of people, let's not kid ourselves, that are feeling disenfranchised by government. They don't feel like they're represented. They don't agree with that. How many people that is hard to gauge in California and different places. And Tim talked about this and touched on this, but what's really changed in in politics in the last 30 years, I've been running campaigns, been involved in politics professionally for 30 years, is kind of the political economy, how campaigns are funded and really run. And there's a variety of things that have done that. One is really this kind of activist billionaire environment where billionaires used to always give. Tim knows I've worked for billionaire clients and big clients, and corporate clients. I'm not an innocent in this, but they always worked for their self-interest, right? There was a real, you could see, if a corporation was doing something, they were doing it for their interest. We talk about Southern Pacific. There was real reasons why it would do those things. We wanted to maintain its monopoly. Now we're in this world where you just have basically activist billionaires and millionaires who will give just because they have an ideological bent that they want to push forward and they want to drive. Has nothing to do with self-interest. It's kind of, anti-enlightenment, view of things where they're basically just ideologically driving these things. And, you know, so that's one thing that's really new is you have this disenfranchised group that we have these activist billionaires. The other thing that, and this is the thing about the Boudin recall, and you know, Tim and I don't really play media critic, but I don't want to say we disagree, but this is the thing I think should be the front page story of the Boudin recall. It's a grift. This is just a massive con. There's no real people associated with the Boudin recall. Not real people. I mean, they're real people. They're actually, you know, human. But these are all political operatives. You know, you got Mary Jung, Andreas Shorter, who they make their living working in politics. You know, you got, you know, Rich Schlockman. You have, you know, and I know the mayor hasn't taken a position on this, but you have the, you know, Maggie Muir, the mayor's consultant. You know, that's who's running this, right? Those are the people who are behind this recall. It's not, you know, crime victims. It's not, you know, people that are really impacted by anything that Chesa Boudin's doing. It's people who, you know, they had $300,000 sitting around and they had to figure out something to do with it. Otherwise they would lose it. And now they're, you know, they've raised you know, close to another 700,000. So they'll, you know, signature gathering, for better or worse, is really has very little to do with like messaging. It's really just a function of time and, you know, money. So if you have enough time and enough money, you get the signatures. There's enough people in San Francisco to sign a petition to recall Boudin. It's just a matter of time and money. So now they have enough money, and you know, they have until October, so they should have enough time to get it done. But you know, really, they took, you know, the kind of wayward Republican Richie Goldberg's, you know, idea, and instead, you know, really grabbed hold of it, and now are using it as a money making tool. You know, I mean, whatever you want to say about and I don't have a real opinion on whether or not they should be recalled to the school board. You know, I think that there's real reasons why they shouldn't, and I am worried about kind of the national move to try to recall and go after school boards. I think they're very, very concerning. But there's real people involved in that. That actually, you know, that's why you're seeing the Boudin campaign trying to kind of grasp hold of the school board recall, because there's actually parents and, you know, people that are concerned about education attached to that. But there's nobody, you know, attached to the Boudin recall that actually has, you know, any real, you know, kind of my take on it, no, any real, like, other than a political reason to be, you know, want to recall the guy, you know, and you know, so it's a real interesting situation. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of different campaigns over the years, and you know, even when we kind of try to make an issue up or create one, we at least try to go find some real people involved. This is really kind of a bold, you know, really a bold move on the Chesa Boudin recall to just like, you know what, we're not even going to try. We're not going to play around, pretend like we have any stake in this. We're just going to use it as a tool from consultants to make some money. It's really amazing. And then just, I want to just bring it up because we are somewhat engaged in opposing it. The, you know, thing that folks should be really worried about if you care about, you know, democracy and the way the state, you know, the state works, is the Sonoma district attorney who's being recalled, which is terrifying. That a multi-millionaire, billionaire developer broke the law. The DA prosecuted them because they broke the law. That's what happens. And now they're trying to recall the DA. You know, this is, you know, one of those things where I just, you know, it's something that is so shocking and so just, you know, blatant abuse of power that it's really, really quite amazing. So, you know, looking at these races, you know, it's really, and you know, folks are saying, you know, the people leading the just to respond to the chat, leading the recall, are Silicon Valley millionaires. That's true, and they just moved here, and I'm not arguing that, but I'm saying there's actually real people. Like these are not like, and I don't know if how to explain the difference, but they're the Chesa Boudin recall. These are just people who are activists, right? Like if you wanted to go hire everybody that's doing the Boudin recall to go, support him, you probably could, if you'd gotten there, a little bit before, because, I mean, Rich Schlockman, who's involved in it, I had lunch with him, I known him for a long time. I had lunch with him well before the recall, and he was bragging about how he was such good friends with Chesa and the whole family, that and that whole world, and now he's involved in it, and so it's, these people are not, I mean, it's completely cynical. And, my concern about the Boudin recall especially is it's so cynical that I think this is the kind of thing that really turns people off on politics. And I'm a big D Democrat, but I'm also a small D Democrat. I really believe in democracy. And I just think that this whole thing, it just makes people even more cynical about the process than, they already are. So anyway, that's my spiel. Happy to take questions or talk to people more about it. But, that's kind of my take on the whole recall that we're seeing, recall fever, as I'm calling it these days, on all of these posts.
I just want to add what you just said about they want to turn people off of government with these recalls. And I think that's exactly right, because then they don't vote in the future. They won't be engaged. And that then who wins is that side that's turning people off of it. That's a good point. There were so many good points that both of you have raised. I'm just, what really shocked me, I just want to say, is that the idea that in a recall, you can raise so much money in these PACs, and yet when you actually have the election, you're limited to $500. That I'm still like just outraged by that.
You can thank the United States Supreme Court for that. Starting with Buckley v. Vallejo and going up through Citizens United, the United States Supreme Court has ruled that money is free speech.
Yeah, but money always finds a way. I mean, not to be, just to be out there. Money always finds a way to engage in these things. They're and like unless you really change, the Supreme Court's been a believer in money and speech are the same, but money always finds a way. They always figure out a way. They always have.
Although, Jim, not in other countries, not, for example, in the United Kingdom, where races are all publicly funded, and donations are basically, private donations to candidates are basically banned.
Yeah, but I'm really good friends with Linton Crosby. I don't know if you know Linton. He's he ran the Boris Johnson, ran all of those campaigns for years. It's always weird. He came out of the Liberal Party in Australia, which is a misnomer, because that's the Conservative Party. And I've known Linton for a long time, and we've talked about it. And he's like, there's some, the money is just constant there. So like, instead of giving money to candidates, they put money into party building, or they put money into other places. So there, I mean, we could talk about money and politics all day long, but money finds a way. It always does. I mean, I'm always a big fan of, the Oregon system. The interesting thing about Oregon is there's no independent expenditure campaigns in Oregon. The reason why is because there's no campaign contribution limits in Oregon. So everybody gives all the money directly to the candidates, and you then know, but because you have to report within 24 hours who gave it to you. Mm-hmm. So everybody knows. Like if the CEO of Nike gives somebody $1 million, everybody knows. And it just becomes clear who's backing whom. But yeah, money. I mean, maybe I'm more cynical than I should be, Tim, but money always finds a way. I mean, and you look at other countries, the money gets spent. It's even, some of these places, it's even more corrupt. basically are paying people directly. It's really, amazing. But that's kind of not the point. What we're seeing here that's different, and this is important, is millionaires who are not doing this because it's in their interest, right? Like, these people it doesn't impact them at all who the DA is in San Francisco, who the school board is. They're doing it ideologically. It's an ideological play to do this. And it's not, something that they're doing to, be, to move a policy or something like that. It's just a pure ideological play. And look, I didn't necessarily support Chesa when he ran. We had a not Susie, but we had helped out another client as an IE. But he's doing what he said he would do, right? There's nothing here that wasn't in the campaign. And just because Susie didn't run that great a campaign, who I know Susie, known her for a long time, nice lady. Just because she didn't run a great campaign and wasn't able to win, that doesn't mean the guy should get recalled. He's going to be up for office in a couple of years. Run against him.
She can run against him then, and she can bring up all of the points about his record. I think what you're saying, Jim, is really important. That's why I highlighted that there's a real estate investor in Chicago who's put up $100,000 to recall Chesa Boudin. He's not going to get prosecuted by Chesa Boudin. Right? It's not even as if the Sonoma County situation, there's somebody who the DA actually went after. These are people who just nationally don't want to see progressive reform for ideological reasons. And so all this money is coming out, and it's coming into San Francisco because they think if they can get a progressive prosecutor out in San Francisco, then they can go after others. And I mean, that's why the Republican money's there. They couldn't win an election fair and square, just like they couldn't win the governor's race. And so they're trying to find another tactic to make it work.
Well, that's what we're seeing, I think, across the board with Republican politics these days is they're anti-democrat, small d Democrat. They're anti-democracy, right? Democracy doesn't work for them. People voting, so they game the system. They gerrymander. They're still trying to count ballots in Arizona. I mean, that quixotic, ballot counting. All of these things, it's that's just anti-democracy. And San Francisco, I mean, one thing is, so I've done a fair amount of work up in Oregon, in Portland, and that they have the clashes that you would see on TV in downtown Portland. In a way, this is almost similar to that, in that the far right is invading San Francisco to create a fight, to make a point, right? This is a pure power play by Republicans to say, hey, we can dominate this progressive city. And that's what, they did it on a physical level in Portland, or doing it at a political level here.
Can we start doing the questions from the audience here, members?
Do you want me to just look at them and answer them, or do you want to choose which ones, or how do you want to do this?
Is Mary there, or Shirley?
I would say go through the chat and approach the questions.
Okay, the first question I see from Art Persico says, Gavin Newsom ran a stealth campaign for governor. He barely campaigned. He didn't even submit a statement about himself for the voter handbook. Very true. Then he appointed a commission to study the future of healthcare in California after supporting, I think, single payer during his campaign. Did his weak campaign for governor and weak or non-existent support for single payer contribute to the lack of Democratic voter motivation to get out and vote against the recall? No, I think this is what both of us have been talking about, that there's a lot of enthusiasm among Republicans to get rid of Gavin. There's not the same level of enthusiasm among Democrats to keep him. Would you agree with that, Jim?
Yeah, and I'd also say I agree with the point on the campaign, right? I thought his general election campaign was lackluster at best, and he had a real opportunity, I think, to build. I mean, he didn't do that great. I mean, he did all right, but in a state that's 53% Democrat, 57%, 56% Republican, or excuse me, Democrat. The guy got low 60. He got what I think he ended up getting like 60%, 61%. So in baseball, he only did 4 points above replacement. If you use the baseball replacement, compared to just a generic Democratic candidate, if you got all the Democrats, he only did it 3 or 4 points better than that. I mean, I thought his general campaign was lackluster at best. And then he kind of came into office, you would think, with a mandate to drive some real change, and not even just on healthcare, just like across the board. And it was very kind of his legislative first, the 2019 legislative session was, I think, a disaster for him. We got a statewide rent control bill that was pretty watered down, passed in 2019, pretty watered down, 10% cap. But all of his other housing bills, when that's the #1 issue in the state, failed. So, just even beyond healthcare, like if you healthcare, sure, single payer, that's a big deal. I'm not going to diminish that, but the #1 issue in the state of California is housing, and the guy didn't get anything done in 2019. And then we roll into a global pandemic in 2020, and the situation just got worse. So yeah, I mean, I think just kind of Newsom not being a great governor is playing a lot into this. I mean, that's why. Is anybody here really excited about supporting Gavin Newsom?
Just one thing, I just understood that there's a complaint been filed in the U.S. The U.S. District Court, really questioning the constitutionality of these recalls. Have you looked into that at all, Tim or Jim?
It's a legal question that I don't know. Jim, I don't think you're a lawyer. I'm not really qualified to answer. It's an interesting question. I will say that from my experience, for the most part, and Prop 22 is proving different, for the most part, courts have been very reluctant to mess with the voters, and to mess with the will of the voters. So, but I don't know. It's an interesting thing. Maybe it'll go someplace. I don't know. But in the meantime, wait a minute. What happens if Gavin Newsom is recalled, and Larry Elder is sworn in as governor, and then a court says the recall is unconstitutional? Right. I'm not counting on the courts to save us on this. They would have to very quickly issue an injunction, a TRO, basically blocking the election. And I just don't see that happening.
And also it plays in federal court, not in state court. So, do we want to really count on a John Roberts court to save us?
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
So really right now, the signature gathering, which I've been a part of trying to, out there for Chesa Boudin, what now they're trying to do in the DCCC is this resolution that seems like, so you can't confront them while they're getting signatures almost. That they're making it, they're protecting those signature gatherers. But in the case of Boudin, you're saying that once they have enough signatures, it's up to the mayor to replace them, and there's no vote. It never comes down.
There will be a vote. There will be a vote if they get enough signatures. There will be a special election in San Francisco with one question on the ballot: do we want to recall Chesa Boudin, just like the governor's election? Now, should they qualify the school board at the same time? It could be a special election with 2. Should we recall these school board members? Should we recall Chesa Boudin? There will be a vote, but it will be a low turnout special election, and that's what they're counting on. Besides, as I completely agree with Jim, on the grifter side of this, besides that this is a way for a bunch of political consultants to make a whole lot of money during a period when there's really not a lot else going on the ballot, that is absolutely also happening. Yes.
But then, unlike California recall for governor, if Chesa and the school board are recalled, the mayor appoints.
Right. The mayor will appoint. So, I think that's one of the reasons the mayor has not said anything in opposition to these recalls. This gives her immense, tremendous power. She will, if this happens and if things go as, she will end up appointing the city attorney, possibly the district attorney, at least 3 members of the school board, and then who knows who they're going to try to recall next, right?
And let's not forget what we're in the midst of the largest corruption case in San Francisco in my 30 years of working here,
Yeah.
right? Like, the level of corruption that's not being reported really by the Chronicle is just, staggering, right? Basically the sale of permits, the whole permit expediting world, all of these things. And, I mean, you basically are taking out the 2 people, city attorney and district attorney, who would be on the local level charged with investigating and prosecuting this corruption.
Right. Again, that involves the mayor who's going to appoint the city attorney and the district attorney. Yeah. Yeah. It's a problem. It's a problem on a lot of levels. I mean, so we have a special election to recall Chesa Boudin, but we won't have a special election to replace him. We won't have any election to replace him. The mayor just does that. I think one of the questioners said, suppose yes wins on question 1, should we rally around a Democrat, progressive or moderate who has the best chance of winning a plurality on that question? Should we at least support someone on question 2? Well, if you ask the Newsom campaign, they'll say, no, it doesn't matter. Just vote no on the recall. It doesn't matter because we're going to stop the recall, right? I think that's awfully hopeful thinking. The problem is there is no Democrat, there is no moderate, there is no Green Party member who has any chance whatsoever of coming in first in that race. If Gavin Newsom is recalled, the person who is elected governor will be a right-wing Republican. That's the only ones who have any name. Jane Fonda is not on the ballot, for better or for worse. All right, Jane Fonda is not on the ballot. No one is on the ballot who has any chance whatsoever of rising to the level of getting 15, 18, 20% of the vote. So you can vote for whoever you want to, if Gavin Newsom is recalled, but don't think that that's going to make a difference. It's going to be one of the right-wing Republicans if he's recalled. Do you agree with that, Jim?
Well, and what terrifies me, what I'm worried about, what my concern is that Kevin Faulconer wins. Because Kevin, I mean, I know Kevin pretty well. He's mayor of San Diego, but younger days, I'm friendly with him. And Kevin's a moderate, he's a Trump supporter. So I don't know if there's such thing as a moderate Republican anymore. But he's kind of the mayor of San Diego, and he'll go up to Sacramento and kind of muddle through and cut deals. And, as we see with the press, it'll be kind of interesting. So they'll write, you could write a whole narrative on it that people kind of like, and, could get him reelected. So the worry I have is you get somebody like him who then gets reelected in November of next year.
Yep.
That's what's scary, because, I mean, look, any of us could pass away at any time, but, Dianne Feinstein is not getting any younger, and more, her life, with her life hangs the balance of the Senate. And I think, 18 months is probably reasonable, but, maybe not 4 years, or 8 years. So that's very much a concern. You have one of the things is, the power. I mean, one thing that people don't realize, I mean, I know we had Republicans, Duke Majan, Pete Wilson, that for years. And then, we had 6 years of Gray Davis and then Jerry Brown. And so we have 14 years of now relatively, or 15 years of 13 years of Democrats. But there's a lot of Republicans still in state government in significant positions, making decisions from the, decades of having Republican governors. And, the appointments that, Kevin Faulconer could make in, or somebody like him or a Larry Elder, or any of these folks can make in, 14, 15 months, that we could be stuck with for, another generation is a real problem. And, I think that, my take on it is that, I understand what the Newsom campaign did. I think it was very much in their interest to keep any Democrat off it. I think it puts a situation, if you are a Democrat, in a challenging spot. So, my advice is just vote no. Man, there's not really, do what you want, but there's not really anybody on the Democratic ballot side that's going to rise to the level of being able to get, as Tim said, 20% to win. So key is vote no. And then, I voted no, and actually did vote for a candidate. I didn't realize somebody I knew was running as a Democrat. Joel Ventresca, Tim, is a candidate on the ballot. So I voted for Joel. But my plan was to just vote no and not vote for anybody. But I was like, why not Joel? He'd be fun.
People who have questions, I guess if they just raise their hands, do you know how to do that, everybody? To raise your hand?
I think put the question in the chat.
The question in the chat, yeah, and we can see it.
All right, okay. Who has a question in the chat?
I did put a question in the chat about the running of the current Newsom recall campaign.
Oh, yeah. You did ask about, it really seems weak to me. No door knocking, no window signs. There's no campaign office. Yeah, Jim can talk more about this than me because he's the campaign expert. But I'll tell you, my family members a month ago were saying, where do I go to volunteer to fight the recall? Where do I go to knock on doors? How do I help? And they were asking me, hey, you're a political reporter. Where's the local office? Where can I go down and volunteer my time to go work precincts and knock on doors, call undecided voters, all those things that one normally does during a campaign? And the answer was, I couldn't find one. Yeah, it's a TV, internet ads, and now finally text messaging campaign, but I'm not seeing, what do you think, Jim?
So my firm, we were hired, we started doing some work with labor 2 weeks ago, to try to drive turnout, and hence Tim, the texting. I don't know if that text probably wasn't from us. We're more over here in the East Bay and working there. But yeah, I mean, as I was told, a lot of the turnout responsibilities kind of been moved or given to labor to try to drive labor in the Democratic Party. I don't know what the Democratic Party's doing in San Francisco. I know in other counties, other places, they're organizing walks, they're doing things, pretty active. But yeah, it's really, I mean, I remember I was talking to another political reporter about, the going early strategy. So that's one of the things is, Newsom and his campaign picked, the September 14th date. It basically was the earliest date that you could go. They could have done this in November or later. They had a variety of concerns about why they wanted to go early. Things were pretty good. And if you remember, we didn't have the Delta, variant, things seemed to be coming back pretty quick in California. So, they felt like it was a good thing. But I actually said you have to put together a turnout program if you're going to do that. Because people are trained. We're trained to go vote in November. That's when we vote, people know when to go vote and they're trained. And, there's certain cues, there's markers that people have that drive turnout, right? Turnout's a really interesting function. I've spent a lot of time on, and there's markers, there's things that make people turn out, not just knocking on the door or getting a text message or a flyer or a call. There's all these different markers. And a September election's off, it's out of context for people. and people have a hard time, oh, wait, there's an election. You know, a November campaign where you have like that ritual really matters and really impacts turnout. And, you know, I feel like the field program, the on the ground program that the Newsom campaign is doing is late. You know, I agree, Tim, this is a, you know, campaign where they're, you know, it's a, you know, online. I mean, I get online ads pretty consistently, you know, anytime I'm online and watch a video or something, pre-roll, but, you know, TV, you know, program. And, you know, I don't know if it's enough. I mean, the nice thing is, the good news is for Democrats is Larry Elder's the front runner. And if you know, if we could come up with a better contrast, I don't know who that would be. Because, you know, if you like the fact that you know, you have a governor or somebody at least somewhat cares about public health and isn't trying to do what DeSantis is doing in Florida, you know, support Newsom. Otherwise, we're going to have the, you know, Florida writ large here in California.
Yep. Brandy asks, when will we see more progressive coverage of the school board recall? Right now, the only thing I saw is in the Chronicle. Voters need to know that the school board recall will cost SFUSD's general fund $5 to $7 million. That's money from classes and programs. You know, the cost of the recall, which seems a significant deal to me, both locally and nationally, and statewide, hasn't gotten a lot of traction with the voters. I don't think people are going to vote against the recall because it's costing money. But I do think that we need more serious coverage of the school board recall that talks about the issues behind it, right? What has the school board members done that have people angry? Who are those people who are angry? And what do they want instead? If the mayor got 3 appointments to the school board, who would she put on there and what would they agitate for? And is this, I think a lot of the supporters of the school board recall are charter school folks. And I think that that's a national thing that we've been seeing. Charter school folks trying to take on local school boards to push for more charter schools. I think that's probably part of it. Definitely part of it is the Lowell question. I mean, that has really gotten a lot of West Side parents upset because they want Lowell to still be an elite test-in type of school. And I wouldn't underestimate the role that has played, which is probably bigger than anything that Allison Collins has done. You know, and I do think that there are a lot of parents upset about the schools being closed, but again, that's a discussion we should have. What I keep asking is, what would you have the school board do? What would you have them done differently? Right. So I think that those issues need to be raised. And I think that this one, the school board recall, is kind of flying below the radar. Everyone's talking about Chesa and they're talking about Gavin. They aren't really talking as much about the school board.
And that's always been an issue. I mean, it you know, problem with San Francisco with education issues is just there's so many people that just don't care about it, and it's that's actually one of the problems is that people just don't focus on it. So it allows it to you know, not have the input or you know, kind of the engagement that it probably should have. You know, and I think if more people cared about it, we probably wouldn't have, you know, kind of the whole situation we're, you know, in, or the whole situation wouldn't have happened is a bit of it. It's just, you know, people don't, you know, there's only 40,000 kids in the city, right? You know, it's just people, so many people don't have kids. They don't really engage on it. But, you know, and there's some, and Brandy put this in there, and I think this is totally right. You know, one of the things we've seen is the school board has been a pipeline to higher office, right? You know, how many supervisors started out on the school board, you know, that then ran for the next thing, right? You know, so it is a real pipeline. And I do think that, you know, moderates, the moderates have, you know, had a few really rough election cycles in San Francisco. You know, they haven't been able to, you know, field really great candidates that really are compelling and you know, for the board of supervisors. And you know, I think that's a real challenge. And I think that there is especially with the school board, kind of a pitch, you know, that's getting made. This is one way to change that. You know, here's a way to change that is, you know, let's create our own pipeline. Let's get our own people on the school board So then we can run them for supervisor or run them for the state assembly or whatever's next.
Laura asks, where can we get all the statistics Tim cited about money for recalling Chesa? I've read the 48 Hills article, but this seems far more extensive. I've actually written about 3 or 4 articles about this. And if you just search 48 Hills, Chesa Boudin, a bunch of them will come up. But the data is all public. And there's 2 places you find it. And one is sfethics.org. And I will, hold on a second. I gotta put this here. I will put this in the chat. sfethics.org. And the other is sos.ca.gov. All right, the state PACs, and you have to look at both, right? The state PACs are registered with the Secretary of State's office. That's sos.ca.gov. Both of these websites are pretty easy to navigate. SF Ethics is a very robust website. It's pretty easy to find stuff. It's pretty easy to navigate. In fact, if you just go to SF Ethics and go to campaign finance data and type in Chesa Boudin, they have to list all the committees against him. In other words, Neighbors for a Better San Francisco has to be listed as opposing Chesa Boudin. So it's pretty easy to find. It's to really track down all this money. All right, and then what I do is then I go to sec.gov, which is the, fec.gov, that's a different one. fec.gov is the Federal Elections Commission. SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commission. That's where you look up Uber. fec.gov lets you check by name people's federal contributions. So for example, if you go there and you type in William Oberndorf, you can see how much money he's given to who on a federal level, everyone from Congress, US Senate, President. So you can check. It's it'll take you a couple hours to fool around with this, but it's kind of fun and it's worth doing. And it's fun if you're like me and nothing I'd rather do on a Friday night than go to SF Ethics and look up money.
It's like a for me too. It's like a rabbit hole. You start going down these, and and like Tim says, and not say I haven't done it. It's you create they create a state PAC. The other thing that I think is hiding the money a bit here, Tim, and you kind of alluded to it, is that a lot of this money was given last year.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Right. So like if somebody wrote a check for $1 million, $100,000 to the Recall Boudin campaign, it pops up on people's radar. You can set it up so you get a notice.
Yep.
Like through the Secretary of State or the ethics, where you'll get a notice if a big contribution like that comes through. You'll get an email. So it pops up. But because this money was given last year, it's kind of old news, right? So the Chronicle doesn't kind of rise to that level. It doesn't really kind of generate that level. I just back to the school board and Tim Redmond here, but one thing I would say is one of the reasons why there's not enough coverage on it, there isn't coverage on it, is I don't think people are opposing it or making enough news or making any news. Same in a little bit. Some of this stuff with Boudin. There's a variety of things that folks can do. It's send out, oppose it, do a formal vote, and as an organization, and oppose it, and send out a press release. Let the Chronicle know, let these folks know. Highlight issues. Don't every reporter at the Chronicle, you can Google their email address, and I know there's editors behind that, but if you just start kind of pushing them hard enough, it'll get into the coverage. We've had some success over the years of really working these folks, and keep pushing it, because it's a new group. It's interesting. Tim, and this is something that we kind of have a new crop of reporters.
Yeah, we do
in San Francisco, and new editors and that sort of thing. And I do think that there's some opportunity. I mean, I have to say, I do a lot of work in Oakland. John is on there. The coverage the Chronicle has done in Oakland, kind of how it's covered progressives and more progressive policy that's happened in Oakland, is almost shocking. Like I get these stories and I'm like, wait, what? I have to go back and look at what paper I'm reading. Make sure I didn't like click through the wrong link. So I think if you kind of keep working on, we can start highlighting some of these issues.
But you have to do that because the advantage of turnover at the Chronicle is, yeah, some of the old guard is gone and we've got some new people. The disadvantage is there's a lot of people at the Chronicle who have no understanding of the history of San Francisco politics. And
Sure.
you really have to educate them about what happened 5 years ago and who some of these players are.
They call me.
Right. They call
That's
you.
why I get quoted. The reason why I get quoted is because they're like, hey, you've been around a long time. Can you tell us about this? And
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in my rocking chair.
Unfortunately, sometimes they don't call you. And sometimes they just start doing stories with, and you read the story and it's like, you obviously have no idea what happened 10 years ago in San Francisco. You have no idea about the history of any of these people, any of these players, any of these candidates. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's yes. There's zero historic. I mean, there's people here that don't even really know where, how to find, barely could find City Hall. But that said, it's like, and I'll tell you, like, I mean, somebody put up Heather Knight, and I've known Heather for a little while, but it's don't complain to her, push stories at her. That's what and I mean, here's a woman, here's a reporter who led, an investigation into Aaron Peskin being mean to staff, which is just the most absurd thing ever in the midst of the largest corruption scandal in San Francisco history. But if you let these people kind of go do their own thing, they're not going to get, they're not going to get what they want. I mean, I just always think of the guy that used to do the rant on KFOG that I would listen to when I drove into work every day, Scoop Nisker. If you don't like the news, go make some of your own.
Yep. Well, I really appreciate being invited here. I have another call at 8:30, so I'm going to have to bail in a minute. I hope that's okay with everyone.
Oh, Tim, thank you again for always enlightening us with so much information. And I've really been impressed with the information people have been typing in the chat as well.
Yep.
So I'm going to remind people at the end. And if you want to type anything before you leave as ways of people reaching out to you with further questions, I know you get a lot of this, but.
That's okay. I'm easy to reach. It's
Okay. There
that's
you
easy to
are.
remember.
Very easy to remember.
I'm an email person. I check my email 97 times a day and it comes up on my phone, and that's the best way to reach me. I don't always answer my phone because I'm on the phone a lot of times. So it's harder to get me by phone than it is just getting me by email.
That's fabulous. So, just to wrap up, as Tim is leaving, and maybe Jim will say a final few words, if there's one thing we can do for the governor recall, we got to say vote no. And there's no hope to find any decent write-in or Democrat to get enough, even if we wanted to.
I would go a step further than that, Shirley. I would say vote no and go get all your friends to vote. Turnout is what matters in this election. This Gavin Newsom, we will get Larry Elder or Gavin Newsom on the basis of who votes. Right. So the most important thing you can do if you want to stop the recall is to call 10 of your friends and say vote, and tell each one of them, call 10 of your friends and vote. You got the ballot in the mail. It's easy, right? You don't even have to go to the polling place. You got the ballot in the mail. Fill it out and mail it in. And I think that if you want to stop the recall, that's the most important thing you can do.
Yep. And I want to Peter put in the chat. Maybe Peter, you'll put it in again. It's sort of be the last thing in the chat. The different folks that are doing phone banking. I think the SF Labor Council and the CFT is doing phone banking. I think the Democratic Party is setting up to do it in San Francisco as well. But take 20 minutes to call people. It's easy. It's quick. You can take an hour. You can take 20 minutes. It's all automated. You just do it from the. These days you don't have to go into anybody's office or anything. You can just go do it, knock it out. Anything you can do to turn people out. I think it's great. You know, I like voting. Voting parties are great. You can do Zoom voting parties. If you don't want to, you know, do it, if you want to do it virtual, but you know, anything we can do to drive turnout. I think, you know, in a lot of ways, the danger for Newsom, I was just talking to somebody about this, is that people are going to rally together and save him, and then they might rally together and take him out with a more progressive
Yes.
candidate.
He doesn't remember who it was. He seems to have forgotten that CNA helped get him elected. And if he forgets that Labor helped him stop the recall, he's going to be in trouble. Okay, I got to run to my other call. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
All right.
Thank
And
you.
I see a hand is raised. John Jung, do you have a quick 1-minute question to ask?
Yeah, okay, I'm off mute, right? Can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Okay, I really believe what I've heard tonight, and yeah, it's a lost cause to have somebody on the second part of the ballot and have them win. But it just seems maybe it would be a good reminder if PDA just endorse somebody. I mean, I guess like Jim was talking about Joel Ventresca, because it seems like we need a reminder that we weren't paying attention. And we should have been paying
Look, we're losing your connectivity.
attention. We should have had backup. And it's really kind of sad this late in the game, run out for a week and a half. We need to remember that this was really dumb, you know, and there's a lot of us who've only been politically involved for
Hey, John.
since maybe
Can't
around
hear you.
the time of Bernie's first one. And
Okay, I'm
we're
gonna
really
mute you.
active, but it's like, oh yeah, we just kind of stupid, you know, that it would have value of endorsing somebody just for the value of, hey, you know, we should have been doing this before.
Yes. And, you know, the reason I'm muting you, John, because your voice was modulating there. But, you know, the reason was that Governor Newsom didn't think it was important to do this, or was too arrogant, as Tim mentioned at the beginning. So there's really not a lot we can do with 3 weeks left. I mean, probably the best way is text banking. And I would say, you know, text banking gets to the most people, you know, but 10 of your friends tell 10 of your friends, tell 10 of their friends, you know, that's another way. But phone banking will be arduous in that case. But text banking could at least get the message out quickly. So that would be my recommendation. As far as Chesa, you know, if you can help table on weekends after August 31st, and I'm going to give a pitch in a little bit, I would say tabling for Chesa so people will be aware of the real facts, not the phony baloney facts. And for the school board, yeah, let's start making up stories about what a great school board we have and all the wonderful teachers and impact that they have on the children, the 40,000 children in San Francisco. So, you know, a lot of people are single or a lot of people are old, so they don't care about children. Well, too bad. We love children and it's the future. So let's see. I think it's now 8:29. Does anyone have an announcement? If you have an announcement, please raise your hand. Or, okay, Laura, I'm gonna unmute you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that we're tabling for Chesa now. And it's important that we do it now. And it's important that we have the documentation that allows people to sign to withdraw their signature. This is a critical effort. And
Don't wait. Don't wait.
Yeah, I mean, we can't wait. We're out there. We need more people out there. If you can table, you can contact me, you can contact Winnie, you can contact Mary, and you can contact Alvin Lee. You can contact the Stand With Chesa people. We need people tabling now.
Okay, Laura, before you go, would you type that website, standwithchesa.org, into the chat? And now I'm going to let Winnie say a word or two. Go ahead, Winnie.
Hi, on another critical issue, I'm a retired teacher, so I'm hearing everything from teachers, what's going on, and it's a nightmare. There's no social distancing, there's no testing. Some rooms still have no windows, no air cleaners. So next Tuesday, August 31st, the union is having a big rally in front of, I can't hear anybody. Okay, next, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay,
I'll
next-
mute the other people.
okay, next Tuesday at 5 o'clock in front of City Hall on the Polk Street side, the union, the teacher educator union, is having a big rally for people to come out and support, because they're demanding that the city help out with all these safety issues that are not happening. Somebody posted a picture today of Lowell High School during passing time, you know, when they're going from one class to another. The kids were shoulder to shoulder. It's insane what's going on.
Okay.
So if you can make it next Tuesday, 5 o'clock in front of City Hall.
Okay, Winnie, will you please type that in the chat so that when people save the chat at the end, they will have that information. Okay, next person up, Kathy Burek.
I just wanted to say it's not too late to take a class at City College. And I do know that the Department of Public Health has an awful lot to do with what you can and cannot do. I was supposed to teach an in-person class, then I was told no, the Public Department of Health didn't approve it yet. Then they approved it. Then they came out with the mandate that all yoga studios have vaccinations. And so now we're not meeting in person until October 1st. And we're back to online, even though we advertised as being in person. So the Department of Public Health has an awful lot to do with what happens in public institutions, especially schools. And then it's up to the teachers, basically, and the people who are there to make sure it happens, that the protocols happen.
Okay, and so is there a particular person at the Department of Public Health that we should make comments to?
I don't know. I would just go to the Department of Public Health.
Okay, thank you for that comment.
Mhm.
Anyone else have an announcement or a comment to make? Otherwise, I am going to make one, but I want to give everybody else a chance. Okay, no one else is raising their hand. So I am once again going to type in the chat the fact that we have a very critical race in the East Bay. The San Francisco PDA-CA chapter did endorse Janani Ramachandran for assembly to take out the corporately funded Mia Banta trying to inherit her husband's seat. And there's phone banking, and I'm going to be phone banking every day between now and Tuesday. And I want you all to join me at least on one of those phone banks. So please, there's the mobilized link, and you can go right there. I've had wonderful calls on the dialer. I can't tell you, I was dreading it. And then I got going, and the people were so nice. They went, oh, it was like, you know, wow, I'm really having an impact. So I hope you will double or triple just between now and Tuesday, and then off to the races for the governor for sure. Anyone else have a comment? Don't forget to save the chat. You all know how to do it, right? You go down.
No,
Okay, down at the bottom where it says to everyone, go past that. There's a little square and then a little face, and then there's 3 dots. It's called an ellipse. And when you click on that little ellipse, up at the top, it says save chat. And that's the way to do it. And you'll have it in your computer file under the Zoom account. And there was a lot of great information posted by Brandy. And I think Art posted some, and a lot of people posted things that was very interesting. for us to go back to later on. Anything else that anyone wants to say to anybody else other than thank you for all the participation and thank you for those great speakers. And hey, we're always busy, huh? Isn't
Yeah.
it great?
Thank you, Shirley.
All right. I'm going to turn off the recording now. If anybody wants to say anything